fantastic, awesome distraction, and I want to pass on to you guys. You sound great. But a couple of years ago, we were studying Plato in one of my classes, and there was a freshman who absolutely insisted that there's a Mumford and Sons song about Plato. I don't know. It might have been one of those things where you just, freshmen. Okay. But it might be worth checking out. Well, I want to thank Leslie and the whole C3 community for inviting me to come up here and giving me this great wireless mic that allows me to dance if I feel so inclined. So, some Madonna moves coming up if we're not careful. And dancing is maybe appropriate or maybe not, because I decided to, for my title, it's Plato's birthday. What does he need? You may be puzzling over that. Well, Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, was born on the 7th day of the month of Thargelion, which turns out in our calendar is yesterday, May 21st, or thereabouts. May 21st is a pretty safe guess. And that would have been in 428 BCE, so if you're doing the quick math in your head, I'll save you the trouble, 2,444 years ago. So how did you all celebrate? I'm curious. As I was looking this up, I came across an old newspaper article somebody had put online. Apparently there was a Plato Club in Bloomington, Illinois, back in the 1880s, who actually celebrated Plato's birthday every year with an all-day thing. I'm not clear what they did, maybe sitting around with their platonic friends, drinking wine, working mathematical proofs. I'm not exactly sure. It sounds like fun. But I thought we would commemorate Plato's birthday by seeing what he has to say that is relevant to our very 21st century concerns about sustainability. And your theme for this month is environmental sustainability. I'm actually going to end up at the very end here branching that out for you. It was really fun to hear that little short excerpt from Plato's Republic performed with two voices. That really, for me, kind of brings the dialogue to life. A lot of you may be familiar with this. It's something that we make kids read when they're young and think about. A lot of you will know that this is the first early great work in political theory, and it goes on to describe the ideal city. That this ideal city is very stratified. It's almost got a caste system where you've got artisans and workers, and then you've got soldiers and police who are there to provide security against enemies. And then to keep all of this in coordination, you've got, of course, as a philosophy professor, my favorite group, the philosopher kings, the guardians, the small group of people who really know what's good for everybody else. And if you're familiar with the Republic, you know that in the discussion of this, quote, ideal city, that there's discussion of the need to censor art. Some things are just not appropriate for people to have. There's a need that arises in this city to lie to people for their own good. It gets worse, actually, to the point where if you really look at this in a certain light, the ideal city that is the subject for nearly all of Plato's great book, the Austrian philosopher Karl Popper in the late 30s said, well, if you want to know where fascism comes from, Plato might not be a bad bet. This is problematic. The thing is, the reading that we had for today is a much less recognized little passage, and I think something really interesting is going on there. Because they don't start in this conversation, they don't start by talking about this complex city with an elaborate police system and soldiers and everything. They talk about a very simple city. Where Socrates describes this city, he says, I think this is the true city. The second one, the luxurious one, with its social classes, he says, is a city with a fever. It's sick. It's consuming itself. It's heading toward ever worse health. Now, life in that city raises really serious issues of justice and injustice, So it makes for more interesting philosophical discussion. This is what these folks are trying to figure out, is like, where does injustice come from? And they find a lot of it seems, in the luxurious city. But the first one, the one that Glaucon, one of the characters in this dialogue, the one that he describes as a city better fit for pigs than for humans, this is the one that Socrates describes as actually being healthy. Well, this whole discussion among Socrates, Glaucon, and Glaucon's brother Adeimantus, it starts with the observation that people form cities or societies so as to more easily meet everyone's needs, right? So what do we need? The two different cities that Socrates describes then are based on two very different notions of what people need to live a good life. Now, a little side note here on the names. The main characters here are Socrates, of course, Plato's great teacher, Glaucon, and Adeimantus. It turns out that historical Plato had two brothers whose names were Glaucon and Adeimantus. Interesting here. He also apparently had a little sister named Petone. And as long as I'm on a digression here, Plato wasn't even his real name. His parents named him Aristocles, but he was a great wrestler in his youth, big, broad shoulders, and he got the nickname Plato, which we have in English in a little different forming, Plateau. His nickname was basically the Mountain. It was a wrestling stage name. What were we talking about? Plato raises a really crucial question with his passing reference to the two cities here before he spends all his time on the luxurious one. What do we need? And what kind of society can we create that will meet those needs in a way that can be sustained well into the future? Well, this is our question. Human population is going to peak somewhere between 8 and 11 billion people in the next 35 years. We're on this population spike. All the evidence, all the trends say that's going to continue a while and then level out around 2050. At the same time, the ways of providing food, energy, water, housing, employment, education, healthcare, and other necessities in the developing countries are straining. In some cases, we are reaching our physical, economic, and cultural limits. If everyone now living, 7 billion people, lived in exactly the way that nearly all of us in this room are living, owning the things we do, transportation, food, everything, it would only take 4 of our planet Earth to supply the current one planet Earth's population doing that. When we talk about reaching physical limits, those are the physical limits. In that situation, we can't do what Socrates says we might like to do, which is to hand on a like life to our offspring. All right, so step back and look for a minute. In Socrates' simple true city, everyone actually has pretty much what they need to live a good life. Glaucon objected, though, because they didn't also have what is customary. I think that's a really interesting phrase. Glaucon can't imagine living in this city, this simple city, because he wouldn't have what is customary. Put it this way, they did not have the kinds of comforts and conveniences that the wealthy, middle-aged, probably slightly paunchy Glaucon had become accustomed to. Or rather, they lacked the alleged comforts and conveniences that Glaucon was accustomed to. We're not even sure that these are genuinely conveniences. We're not sure they're genuinely good things. Well, look at this. Plato was pretty prescient here. The first thing Glaucon mentions that he would want to have that he doesn't think he would have in a simple city is a couch to sit on, to be comfortable, followed by a nice dining table filled with rich foods. Well, we all know that that kind of rich food can become a problem, right? Recent biomechanics studies have shown that sitting on couches and chairs all the time is actually pretty bad for us too. Leading figure in this is a woman named Katie Bowman, who's done a lot of research and advocates, moving in a way that our bodies are better set for. And she's been featured in Good Housekeeping for her furniture-less home where she's raising her kids. If you want to know a whole lot more about this, my wife Sandy has spent the last few years studying with her, which is why I'm familiar with this. The evidence is that we are physically much better off if we aren't sitting on couches, eating at tables, if we're regularly moving around, getting up and down from the floor, crawling, climbing around in a variety of positions, walking a lot, carrying stuff from one place to another. But this is an uncomfortable amount of work for people who are accustomed to life in a luxurious city. Sitting on a couch or in a chair all day is comfortable because we have become accustomed to it. We've also become accustomed to things like low back pain and knee replacements and hip pain. Right? This is not incidental. This is not a coincidence. Anyway, we become accustomed to this by sacrificing our capacity for more varied, constant movement. Think how much work it takes to get a group of first graders to sit in chairs all day. Right? It's nearly impossible. Our society requires that they learn that, but their bodies resist it. Glaucon, in his gentrified post-first grader physical state, he, in some sense, does need a couch to be comfortable. He's adapted to that. But what he really needs, at a more fundamental level, is to live a different, more able-bodied life. In that life, he would be so healthy that a couch would feel uncomfortable to him. What he really needs is the life of better movement, simpler, healthier food, honest and meaningful work, and freedom from the fear of being attacked by people who want to take his stuff or who resent his privilege. Such a life would be both healthier and, probably more important to Plato, although he was a professional wrestler, more just. I think he put justice and health both pretty high up on the chart. When I'm talking about the justice of our society, realize that Glaucon, this wealthy Athenian in the golden age of the city of Athens, one of the comforts that he almost would have certainly taken for granted was having some servants in his house. I mean, slaves. Right? So here's this first great, incredible discussion of justice in Western history, and nobody even bothers to mention, oh, by the way, slaves. Okay? Everybody's got their blind spots, and that's kind of the theme here. All right. In an age when we are reaching limits to the resources that allow us our accustomed way of life, Plato's question is urgently ours. So what do we need? Look, I'm right here with you. Given the way we built our cities and arranged our social institutions, in some sense, I can't live without my car, my computer, my smartphone, my closet of different kinds of clothes. I dressed up, for those of you who have only seen me in Hawaiian shirts playing steel drum music. All right. Different kinds of clothes. My washer, my dryer, my fairly big house with climate control and electric lighting, refrigerator, freezer, stove, lawnmower, and of course a leaf blower. I think that's Michigan state law. Issued a leaf blower when you get your driver's license. And coffee, right? Not locally sourced, we don't do that. So I, of all people, am pretty well aware of the economic, social, and environmental cost of these alleged necessities. I'm teaching a class this summer. We're going into our third week now, and I had my students do a little exercise last week, a carbon footprint calculator. Has anybody ever done one of these? Real eye-opener, isn't it? So I was setting up this assignment for my students, like, oh, I probably ought to run through and see, make sure they work the way I think, and so I can tell the students what to expect. And so I ran my carbon footprint, and I try to be pretty conscientious, but you know what? That commute in my Toyota Corolla, 2 or 3 days a week from Spring Lake to Allendale, killed it, right? Off the charts. Not as bad as if I were driving a much bigger vehicle, but there we go. So I know this. It doesn't change the fact that in some sense I do need most of these things anyway. But there's a very funny thing going on here. I need most of these things in order to ensure that I have the others. I need these so I can have those. My students run into this very often. They're having a hard time getting their work done. They're short on time. They have to work full time. I say, well, what's the deal? Like, well, I need a car. Like, okay. And to have a car, I need a job. Okay, why do you need the job? Well, mostly to pay for the car. Right? Tell me again why you need the car. Well, I need mobility in a city that requires long distance travel to work and to school, but which doesn't have good alternatives to me owning my own car and driving it with one person as a passenger. Okay, now we've actually identified the real problem. We build our cities wrong. Taken all together, these things basically allow me to function, or at least keep up with imposed responsibilities in a city with a consuming fever. That seems to be where I am. But how much of this would I need in the simpler, healthy city? Very little of my stuff, of what I do, directly meets a basic need, something that's necessary and sufficient for a good life. Food, drink, shelter, safety, family and friends and community, meaningful work, health care when I need it, autonomy in deciding what to do with my time. How much stuff do we need to meet those basic needs? It's not that much. Now, how much do we set ourselves up for? That's an extremely hard question, and a dangerous one. It takes us into socially and culturally contentious territory almost right away. This is a question Thoreau asked at Walden Pond. Most people consider him a crank because he wanted to go live deliberately, and then he reported back, hey, this is what it's like. They also forget that he did move back into town after a couple of years once he had gotten his answers, right? He didn't stay out there. You may be just now entertaining fantasies of returning to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, living in the rainforest in Ecuador, life as it was 6,000 years ago, except with access to vaccines, antibiotics, maybe the internet, maybe not the internet. We got to decide on that one. Now that might be one approach, but there's not enough rainforest for us all to do that. Maybe you're thinking of a village of Thoreauvian tiny homes with kitchen gardens. That might actually be a pretty good answer, but again, that's not going to be for everybody. The thing is, I can't tell you how to live because I don't know how you need to live. But I can tell you questions we all have to answer. What do we actually need, we 21st century people? And how do we build a world and an economy and a society to provide that and not a bunch of other stuff? Many of you will know how we frame Plato's question about need today. The triple bottom line model, familiar maybe? The triple bottom line. It comes from a book, the best book title ever, Cannibals with Forks, by a business writer named John Elkington, published in 1997. His concept is if we're doing something fundamentally misguided and we just get a little more elegant at it, if we're using forks but we're still cannibals, we really haven't gone far enough in the right direction. He points out, Elkington argues, that we need to accommodate 3 different dimensions of sustainability. They're all necessary, they're all intertwined, and they all have to fit together within the broader context of culture and nature. So very briefly, there are different ways this gets explained, but Paul Elkington is a business writer, so he says, well, of course economic sustainability is important. If you're a business or a school or a city or a nation, don't go broke, right? Don't go bankrupt. That's, we understand a lot about economic sustainability. So environmental sustainability, the second E. Equally important, we need to look at the bottom line there. What are we doing to the natural systems that support us? What are we doing to our stock of finite resources? We need to account for that. And literally, people in the accounting department at places like Grand Valley are figuring out how do you literally account for those things. The third E is equity, social justice. We also have to build our systems that are free of exploitation, of oppression, and so on. Right? All three legs of the triple bottom line. Well, that's a framework. There are other ways to think about it. We can maybe talk about this in the talk back. Plato, in the Republic, is telling us, hey, it's up to us to figure out what that sustainable world looks like. Except, unlike Plato, we have to think of it in the context of 8 to 11 billion human inhabitants. We're pretty smart people. We should be able to get this done by noon. At least we'll try. All right, thank you very much.